Okay, cool. All right, y'all. I would love someone to tell me what DOM stands for. What is the DOM? Angel.
Is it document object model?
Yes. Thank you. Okay. And geez, come on. All right. And I'd love for someone else to tell me what the document object model is. Anyone have any ideas? What did y'all talk about with your groups? Hope.
So the document object model it's roughly the combination of the HTML and CSS prepared for the page itself. However, it can be modified to like fix unended sections or something else.
Yeah, so I think that is definitely like kind of getting at what it is. I would say that it is a representation of the HTML. I'll just say of like a web page, we'll call it that. So one thing to note is I would mention that the JavaScript and the CSS are actually separate. They are all things that you can manipulate in the document object model, but they are not a part of the model itself. Just to get like real technical there. Cool. Okay, so what, Ben, I see your hand up.
I was just going to tack on that it's we're just reading through the that DigitalOcean article, and it seems it's kind of like this language agnostic kind of almost a structure, like how there's a agreed upon structure of REST that people behave to. Seems kind of along the same lines of it's kind of a structure or framework for how these things should behave.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say like a structure or framework for browsers to maybe display and manipulate HTML. Would y'all agree with that? Okay, cool. Yep, and I love the point of like it being language agnostic. One thing I think is interesting is that although it is language agnostic, what language does pretty much every browser utilize to interact with the DOM? Qua.
Wouldn't that be JavaScript?
Yes, that's right. So JavaScript is used I'll say most, if not all, and there's always an exception. So I am very careful to say like all browsers. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So when we think about the DOM, how is the DOM different than say the HTML markup? So thinking, just putting this in perspective, you have your Rails application, you've got your ERB, template that you're creating. What does that ERB generate? Any?
HTML.
Yes, thanks, Jake. It generates HTML. And so when you think about that HTML that's being generated, that is then sent over as a response to a request when you want to visit a web page, right? You can do like a get to /welcome, and the response is some HTML markup. How is that markup different than the DOM? Any ideas? Genevieve, what do you think? Oh, sorry, Jake, I didn't see your hand. I'll spare you, Genevieve. Jake.
I just raised it due to the awkward silence.
Taking one for the team.
HTML is static. The DOM can interact with other things like JS and CSS, and it can be changed.
Yes, kind of. Yeah. The DOM is, remember, just a representation of the actual HTML markup. So I'm going to write it again. The DOM is a representation of the actual HTML markup. So for instance, say we, and to Jake's, to add on to what you were saying, Jake, is that we can use JavaScript and CSS to modify the HTML. And it's not really modifying the HTML. The HTML is static, like you said, it stays, it is what it is, but to modify the DOM. And therefore, altering what the user sees in the browser. Okay, does the difference between those two kind of make sense? So for instance, if you open up developer tools and inspect the page, which is what we're going to do, and in the console, you add in some CSS or you add in some JavaScript, like some inline CSS or some JavaScript, the page is going to change. But then if you refresh the page, it goes back to what it was before. And that's because the HTML markup that's coming back from that request has not been modified. So you're just modifying the DOM in the browser. Any questions about that? Angel.
So whenever we go to in our like console inspect our page, like to test specific stuff, is that like we're altering the DOM? Because whenever we end up closing out of that web page, it doesn't alter the HTML in our application.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Cool.
It is modifying the DOM in the browser. You know, like a good thing to note too, like just to be clear, like you're not making additional HTTP requests to the server to like modify that HTML. It is all happening in the browser. And so when we think about JavaScript, something that's interesting, did y'all know that JavaScript is a language that is created to run inside of kind of like a host environment? Is that something that you covered in your intro to JavaScript at all? Okay, I see a mixture. So I'll just like unpack that a little bit. So JavaScript was made when it was created in like 10 days, right, in 1996 or whatever, for like the Netscape browser. That's kind of the backstory. By one person in 10 days wrote this language that's now like widely adopted. It was created to run inside the browser. And so if you want to run JavaScript outside of the browser, you need to run Node, which is its own kind of like host environment for JavaScript to run. Otherwise, like JavaScript isn't gonna run and be like transpiled down to like machine language and all of that kind of stuff. So like you have to do it in a host environment. And the, Harrison, you've got some stuff going on. So that is, oh my gosh, where was I going with this? I'm so sorry, y'all. I totally lost my train of thought. Angel, what sparked that? If you're still, it looks like you may have stepped away. That's okay. Anyway.
I'm back, sorry.
Okay.
I was just talking about how whenever you go to test stuff in your web browser, you like open inspect and then
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So long story short, here's my point, is that when you think about JavaScript and you're writing it in your backend application, so you have your, your ERB and Rails, you've got all of your HTML, you've got your embedded Ruby inside of that. That's all gonna generate HTML. But then you've got like an additional, maybe like you include JavaScript on the page and you have it in the bottom of the page, or you have it in some other part of the application where like along with the HTML markup that gets sent to the browser, so does this chunk of JavaScript. That JavaScript isn't running on the back end. That JavaScript gets sent in its whole form. Maybe it's like minimized and minified so that it's, more performant and takes up less space, but it gets sent to the browser and then it actually starts to execute in the browser. Okay, so your whole document, your HTML markup gets loaded into the DOM. So you create this object like representation of that HTML document, and then the JavaScript that you created that got sent over in the response, that then runs and then changes the markup and manipulates the page. So there's just like multi-step process that's happening every time you load a page. First, the DOM is loaded, and then the style sheets are applied, and the JavaScript is used to manipulate the DOM after the fact, after it's loaded in the browser. So I just want to make that clear in terms of where that's actually happening. And I think, Angel brought up a good point, and so I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so DOM is loaded first based on the HTML. And I'll call it a document, but really it's like the HTML that you get sent over to like build a page. And then CSS and JavaScript are applied. Okay, cool. All right. So now let's talk about how we actually access the DOM. So if we want to manipulate the DOM ourselves, we can do that because the DOM is an object. So the DOM is an object. And what do objects have? If you think about a Ruby object, what is it? Adam.
Attributes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We might call those like properties as well. What else does an object have? Hope, I see your hand up.
Methods.
Yeah. Woohoo. Okay, cool. And we can access this object using dot notation because it's an object. Okay, cool. So let's do a little exercise, and y'all can follow along with me as we do this. As I do this, I'm going to just open up in my browser. I just have the lesson plan pulled up here. And let me clear my console. So what I'm going to do, and if for some reason, if you've never seen the developer tools before, I will show you from the beginning. So on a web page, what I like to do is I like to right click and then go to inspect, and that's going to pull up the Chrome DevTools. Other ways to access it are, I think, in file, I don't know. Somehow you can get to it somewhere else. I think also, let's see, Command Option I is the keyboard shortcut to pull up the DevTools. And the other thing is, like, if you pull it up and all you see, you can see like the console here, you can see the DOM. This right here is your document object model. So the browser has loaded like all of the portions of your HTML into your DOM. And so if you kind of hover over each part, it'll highlight like what part that is. So yeah, I know y'all have probably at this point seen this. In case you haven't, I'll just kind of like go over and let you see. This is what the DOM looks like. And now if I want to access elements of the DOM, I can come over to the console tab, which is fine. Or I don't know if you know this, if you press escape, the console will pull up at the bottom and you can still see like kind of the structure of your DOM at the same time, which I find really helpful. Let me just clear out some of these messages. So one thing you can do is you can access everything with document. So the document pulls up the entire HTML document, and then you can access different properties of that document, like the body. And so it'll kind of highlight what that is. And then you could pull up, you can use methods on the document. There it is. You just had to press enter. So then it'll pull up just the body of the document and give you everything inside of that body. And this DOM is made up of different nodes that you can traverse. So like body would be like a node, and then like each of the divs inside of the body would be like additional nodes that you could traverse. So then there are different methods that exist on our DOM because it's an object. And so one of those, I'll just show you, is query selector. So this is a method that will allow you to select a specific element on the page that you want to select. Joseph, I see your hand up.
Yeah, do you mind making your text just a little bit bigger?
Oh yeah. Yep, sorry about that. Is that better? Okay. I forget how small it shows up over Zoom. Okay, so I can do document and I can say query selector. And the great thing about autocomplete is it'll pull it up for you. One thing to note too is this is now camel cased. So in Ruby land, we're used to doing like snake case, where it's like you separate words with an underscore. Here, you start out with lowercase, and then when you want to, put two words together, the second word and then other words on are capitalized. So just note that, and that's how you write JavaScript. So I can say query selector, and I want to choose the first H1 header. Okay. And so now here it'll show me like what that header is. Okay. And so say I wanted to select the text inside the header, I could do something like inner text, and it's going to return to me the text inside of the header. So now I can start, now that I can select different nodes from my document object model, I can now start to manipulate them. So one thing I might do is say document query selector H1. So I'm going to grab the first H1 on the page, is what that's saying. I'm going to modify the style, and then I'm going to change the color to like pink. And now I can modify that HTML on the page. Any questions about that? Does that seem pretty exciting? I feel like the first time I manipulated HTML in the browser, I was pretty jazzed. I thought I was super cool. So it's okay if you feel that way. All right, so, and I know y'all are like so much more advanced and smarter than I ever was when I was a student at Turing. So if this is review, like, please let me know and I'll speed it along. Okay. So we are going to get into like manipulating different things. And what I want to do is give y'all an opportunity to kind of do that on your own. So what I would like you to do is take the next 2 minutes to modify the inner text of this first H1 to change the name of the lesson. Basically, change the name of the lesson to whatever you want. Feel free to like Google if you want to figure out, you know, exactly how to do that. I can also kind of scroll up. I think I've given you kind of all of the pieces to be able to do that here. So see if you can figure out how to change the text for this first H1. And I'll give you until 32. Angel, I see a question.
Okay, yes, I apologize if I missed this, but I am trying to do document.query selector, and it's telling me document.query selector is not a function at anonymous 110.
Okay. Do you have query selector like properly camel paste?
Yes.
And did you try to just type in
Oh,
document first?
I think I misspelled selector. Okay, wow, that was stupid.
Okay. All right.
Never mind.
I do this all the time. I think one of the things that really helps me is autocomplete because I know I'm like spelling things right if I get the list of like possible options. So I would. Yeah,
Thank you.
good way. Sure, absolutely. Okay, so it's 1:32. I would love, yeah, can someone maybe tell me what to type or like give me an example of what you did? I'll just type it here and we can see it for everyone as long as it's appropriate. Not ever assuming that any of y'all would ever do anything inappropriate to this webpage. All right. Who would like to be, oh, Jake. Hey, Jake, is it okay if I
Yeah, I'll just try
call
to
in
keep it
someone
rolling.
else?
Call someone
Thanks.
else.
I really appreciate you, Jake. Thank you. Jeremiah.
I'll take
Go
a crack
ahead.
at this. I guess
Okay.
document that query selector.
Okay. Cool. Oh, Jake. Okay.
And then we're going to do the H1 tag.
Okay.
And then dot enter text.
Perfect.
And then I just put hi in quotations.
Hi. Okay. Whoop, whoop, we did it. Okay. Yep. Perfect. Thanks. Appreciate it, Jeremiah. Okay, so this is an example of us manipulating the DOM, and we're using JavaScript to do it. So sometimes people refer to pure JavaScript as vanilla JavaScript. So if you ever see that, I think it's like making an analogy with ice cream or something. I don't know. They just call it vanilla JavaScript. Like it's not like Rocky Road JavaScript or something like that. It's vanilla. It's plain. So what we've done is we've manipulated this web page using pure JavaScript. And we did it in the DOM, which means we've only changed the document object model. So now if I refresh the page, everything goes back to how it was defined in the original HTML markup that we get from the server. Okay. So if you actually want to modify this, if you want the JavaScript to run every time the page is loaded and like modify what's here, you have to define the JavaScript server side and have that be sent over with the request. All right, let's go ahead and take a palm and we'll come back at 40 and then we'll keep going.
Alex, you're muted.
I just shared with you the secrets of the world and you all missed it. Just kidding. Okay, thank you. All right, so now that we know what the DOM is, we know how to manipulate the DOM. We know that we can use JavaScript primarily to manipulate the DOM. Let's talk about jQuery. Yes, anyone have an idea what jQuery is? Jenny, what is jQuery?
It's a form of JavaScript, I think.
Okay.
A library.
Yes. A JavaScript library. That is right. Okay, so in other words, it's a library that's like built with JavaScript. What does jQuery allow you to do? Anyone know? Or any thoughts or ideas? What do you think it is? Hua, what do you think?
I think it helps us simplify JavaScript a little bit in certain syntax.
Yeah. So it provides a more simple way to manipulate the DOM. Yep. And I think the syntax and methods are much shorter and concise. I should just say the syntax are shorter and concise. Than JavaScript. All right. So jQuery, basically, and it has like a shorthand syntax of this like query selector. So you'll see this $, which is like the shorthand syntax for basically like document. So for like selecting the whole document, you often see like this $, kind of used as an alternative. I'll just say selecting the document. Okay. So jQuery, let's look at some jQuery in the DOM. Actually, this is, I think, a perfect time for y'all to jump in and try it out yourselves. So just know that like when you're writing jQuery, you actually are using JavaScript. It's just JavaScript under the hood. You just have this great kind of like domain specific language, this DSL that's written for you to be able to access DOM elements and manipulate the DOM using kind of a shorthand syntax that makes it a lot easier to write and to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So if y'all will head to the lesson plan, you'll get to this first try it section. And this, we're going to use something called CodePen. And CodePen is a really handy dandy tool that allows you in the browser to play around with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can see exactly like what's being generated without having to go through the process of like loading the browser and like, you know, creating the markup on your own and, you know, sending that over as part of the response for an HTTP request and all of that. So like it just makes it really easy to play around with stuff. So what I want you to do is I'm going to put you back into breakout rooms and I want you to follow the instructions in Slack. So the first step is to do the try it. So everything that's like mentioned here, like just go through the steps to play around with it in CodePen. Then I want you to write down in your own words kind of what is happening with JavaScript. So you're going to add this line and I want you to write down like, and this is jQuery now because you see this little $. Write down what this means kind of like step by step. And then I want you to share it with your group. So share what you think is happening with that line of code with your group. And then if you have extra time at the end, play around with this and see if you can make other things happen. So and I believe you can just like do this in the browser. Like you don't even need to, well, you want to click on like edit. So it'll pull it up here. And then you would add this line like in the JavaScript section. And then you would press enter to like run the code, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Is that clear? This first one should be pretty straightforward and simple. It's not going to, you know, it shouldn't take too long. So plenty of time to talk through that line of jQuery together make sure you write it down. Like if you have a piece of paper, if you have notes up on your computer, I want you to get in the habit of writing it down. This is the time that we're going to practice using some technical vocabulary. So see if you can be as, technically accurate as you can in your descriptions of what's happening in the code, and talk about that with each other. All right, here come breakout rooms. I'm just going to put you back in the same breakout rooms for this one. And I'll give you another 5 minutes to play around and talk about it. Make sure everyone has an opportunity to share what they wrote down in their notes. And then we'll go from there. Okay. I want everyone to just have an opportunity to say it out loud. It really does like make a difference when it comes to, being able to use like technical vocabulary in interviews and stuff like that. So give each other the time and space to practice. Cool. So here, instead of, this is very similar to what we did with JavaScript, where in our example, we changed the color of the H1. This is an example of doing that with jQuery. So you'll notice that like the amount of words and typing that it took was like slightly less. And that'll only, prove to be valuable in other places as you get to know, jQuery a little bit more. So I want to talk about a couple of things first, and then I'm going to let you loose on your own to kind of walk through this for a few minutes and try out some of these examples and then talk about them together in small groups. So what I want to talk about real fast is user events and event listeners. So we're going to jump back over to our notes, and I'm going to just want to go through that real fast. So one thing I think that's really interesting to think about is the whole point of JavaScript is for users to be able to interact with web pages. And so like when you hover over something, like maybe something moves, or when you, maybe you can expand different things on the page without having to refresh the page to change it. Or animations, like those are cool. Like let's talk about how we actually do that with JavaScript. So the main point, I'm just going to say the main point of JavaScript is for users to interact with web pages. So JavaScript has something cool called, so when you think about like a user interaction, there are different types of user interactions. Okay, so some of those involve things like mouse clicks. So a user wants to be able to click a button. Some of those involve things like hovering. Okay, what are other ways of interacting with a web page? Does anyone know some other examples? And I think probably this is just a hover, maybe not a mouse hover.
Key press?
Yeah, a key press for sure. Things like mouse move, like just moving the mouse in general, and then moving it in different directions. You can kind of pick up on that. So yeah, these are all some some ways, you know, that you can interact with a web page. And I'm like doing it all over. My mouse is moving all over. I'm clicking on things, I'm highlighting them. I'm, you know, something is active, like when I'm actively like interacting with that thing on the page. So you can, there are lots of different ways to interact. And so what JavaScript has is something called an event listener. It is a way for, in your code, you can listen for a specific type of user event, and you can, or I'll say user interaction. And then, and when that interaction is detected, you run some code. You do something specific. Okay, so this would be like, hey, when I hover over, you know, this specific H3 or whatever this is, I don't know, this specific text, then I want to change the color of it to red. You know, things like that. When I click on the page, like I want this menu to expand. So those are event listeners. So that is going to have like some specific syntax. So you're going to start with like your query selector. So, you know, say I want to take like a class called, I'll just use this example from our lesson plan. And then it's going to be a method called on. So this is a jQuery specific method called on. And then I'm going to pass in the specific type of event that I'm listening for. So when I click on like anything with a class of change me, then I'm going to give it some code to run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it a callback. Do y'all remember, you know, when have we used callbacks in Ruby and Rails? Any ideas? When have y'all implemented a callback before? Does anyone know? Genevieve.
Like in the controllers, you can do before action. So you call on some method before, or like a before save on the models before you save a record.
Yeah, so it's like when, you know, this code is evaluated, or like when I navigate to this controller, this route, which brings me to this controller and this action, then I'm going to execute this code, right? And so like, and you're defining the before action like somewhere else. And it's like, before I get to this specific place, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to execute this code. And that's just an example of it happening before. Sometimes it can happen after. So it's like after I save this record to the database, then I want to execute this specific code. So when you think about a callback in JavaScript, it's the same thing. So when I'm listening, when somebody clicks this button, then I'm going to execute this code. And the way we do that is by passing it what's called an anonymous function. And so a function is similar to a method in Ruby. It's a block of code that you can run, and you're going to pass it an anonymous function, meaning it's not named. It has no name. You have no way of accessing this function again anywhere else. Like you didn't save it to a variable. It's just a block of code. You're defining a block of code that you're going to run. And so then inside of this function, you can then define, you know, whatever you want to happen. I want to, you know, select all of the change me, and I want to change the inner text to like, hello. So something like that. So like if you click on the button, it's going to change the text, and it's because you pass it this callback as an anonymous function. All right, questions about that? All right. What I'd like y'all to do is I'm going to give you 15 minutes. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick palm first. So here's what I'll do. I'll give you 20 minutes. Take a palm at some point in that 20-minute time period. And then what I want you to do is on your own. Actually, I'm going to stick you into small groups to do this kind of together, on your own and together. And I want you to go through the rest of these examples, and I want you to try to implement them using the CodePen and get an idea of the syntax. Write out what you think is happening in your own words, trying to use that technical vocabulary. So we'll say, like, you know, we've got an event listener and it's listening for a click event. And inside of our anonymous function, we're manipulating the DOM in this way. Like, you try to use some of those words on your own. Try to work through as many of these as you can. If you don't get through all of them, I think that's totally fine in that time. But try to get through and just like make sure you understand, you know, kind of what's going on inside of here. We'll come back after that point with any questions. And then we'll move on to the next section of our class, which is Bootstrap. Jake.
Is there a way to reload like the actual web page without reloading the whole CodePen?
No, but you can open the CodePen up in a different tab. So like if you click on Edit CodePen, it'll open up in a different tab, and then you can edit that there, so that if you do want to reload this page.
Oh yeah, that's already what I'm doing. I meant like I'm like in a CodePen like specific page like that. I'll just open it, like reload the bottom half without like losing all my JS.
Oh yeah, I think you can. Did you just click enter after you typed in JS? Like, so if I do this and then I click enter, it should run. Did you see that?
Yeah, but it's not like resetting it to before the click.
Oh, to before. If I remove or I comment out this code and then click enter, it goes back.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
All right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to give you until 2:25. Take a palm in that time. I'm going to stick you back in your breakout rooms. Just coordinate with your breakouties and decide when you're going to take a palm versus when you're going to work one versus when you're going to discuss what's happening in the code together. All right. Okay, here you go. I'll be in the main room if you have any questions and want to jump back in or something like that. All right.
What's that doing?
All right. I'm here. Okay, cool. So I hope y'all had an opportunity to kind of experiment and play around with a few things. And you probably didn't get through the whole thing in the time that we had, but I think that's okay. I would definitely recommend just kind of using this as a resource to kind of go back to get you started on your jQuery journey in the future. But just want to also take a moment to kind of like ground us in the learning goals for this lesson. Something that I think And let me just share my screen real fast. Okay. All right, can y'all see that? Yeah, so what we really wanted to do today was just to understand a little bit more about how to start to navigate, you know, the DOM and manipulate some of those HTML elements using jQuery, and then to start looking at some of the patterns that are involved with jQuery. The other thing that the takeaway from today was to explain like what jQuery is and why it's beneficial. So do we have any questions about any of these learning goals? Or do we feel like if anyone needs a little bit more clarification on any of these areas, I'd love, you know, for y'all to let me know and let's discuss now. Okay, Doug.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where do you implement jQuery in your program? Like, how do you translate the stuff that we're doing in CodePen into an actual project?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I might drop, there's an old lesson that we had that talked about specifically like how to add JavaScript into a Rails application. There's a few things that you can do. One thing that you can definitely do is if you have the jQuery, I think it's like jQuery Rails gem like added to your into your gem file, you can just start writing jQuery, and you can do that inside of you know, like your, I think it's like your application.js file inside of your assets directory. Like you can start writing jQuery there. One thing to note is it's accessible to every single view that you have. And so that's like not usually like a great place to add code. You want to keep it like as page specific as you can. And so there are some ways to do that. You can add JavaScript files and then include them at the bottom of your views. And so I will dig up that resource and try to show you like where to add that. Now, like some cool things that you could do with jQuery is, you know, I think it's really at this point might be like worthwhile just to explore like something like Bootstrap, which is using like jQuery and JavaScript under the hood, and to create some like meaningful user interactions rather than trying to like hand roll your own at this point. But anything you can imagine, like you can definitely do with jQuery in terms of like, you know, if you want to change, you know, like text, or if you want to change any element on the page, like when you like hover over it or you mouse over it or you click it and you don't necessarily want the page to refresh, you want something else to happen, that would be good places to like start dropping in a little bit of jQuery and JavaScript onto your page. So it really is kind of specific on what you want the user interaction to be. But I will provide some more resources for how to incorporate that into a Rails app as well. The next portion of this lesson is actually going to be kind of a self-guided Bootstrap exploration. And by self-guided, I mean a go at your own pace Bootstrap exploration. So what we're going to have you do is actually watch a video that Ian recorded from a couple mods ago, going through that house salad repo that I had y'all set up ahead of time. And he's going to walk through how to add Bootstrap into that. And what Bootstrap is it's a library that allows you to add like HTML elements into your markup that then will give you like different, that it's kind of magical in that like you get a lot of different like user like UI elements for free. So like if you wanted to implement like a carousel, it's much more simple. You just add specific classes into your HTML and maybe add like a snippet of JavaScript, and then boom, like on your page, you have this wonderfully formatted carousel that has like a bunch of animations. So it's kind of a different library for you to kind of boost your UIs without having to do all of the work of hand rolling all of those elements. So I know a number of you have played with Bootstrap already. And so for this portion of the class, I'm going to give you some specific instructions. You're going to jump into the video at a certain point, provided that you have the repo set up, and kind of follow along at your own pace. You may find that you want to go faster, or once you get the hang of it, you want to explore Bootstrap on your own. Feel free to do that. If you've already explored Bootstrap and you're like, I've been there, done that, like you don't have to do this portion of the class. So it's really just kind of a choose your own adventure. And this video also goes through how to set up Bootstrap inside of a Rails application. So that if you're not familiar on how to do that and you want to be able to like add it into your project, this video will help give you some guidelines on how to do that as well. All right, any other thoughts or questions? And I haven't been great at checking the chat, so I apologize. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we are going to, I will post some instructions in the Slack channel. If you run into any issues or have any questions, I would say feel free to like DM me. I'm gonna hop off the Zoom call, but I'll be around if you do have any questions or if there's anything that you want to discuss. Feel free to also put questions in the code help channel so that everyone can kind of see those questions as well. And we will go from there. Sound good? Okay, all right, thanks everyone. I will talk to you all in a little bit, and happy bootstrapping.
Thanks, Alex.
All right.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye.